English translation. 360-second contact. Friday, 2nd July 2004, 042 hours.
Be greeted, my friend. Unfortunately, I had to leave again after our proofreading session with Bernadette. So I am just getting here now, even though I was supposed to be here at 22:30 HRs.
It is no big deal. Eva was still here until 2 or 3 minutes ago. Be welcome, and my greetings to you too. If I may ask you now, what did you find out about the handprints on Atlante's car? Surely Florina told you that I asked you.
Yes, she did. The question was which acid humans had been in the center lately. I assume the term acid humans comes from you?
Right.
I do not know why you asked about it because, as Florina explained to me, you did not say what your question was about. But I understood that your question was about the Trilaner. 2 of them have taken over Florina's and Enjana's duties for 6 weeks with regard to the monitoring work. Because the 3 of us are absent for this time, which is why I cannot do any corrective work with Bernadette and you. The 2 of them were on the center grounds on the night of the 25th and 26th of June to stretch their feet, as you sometimes call walking outdoors. They were walking around the center in the early hours of the morning when Madeleine was on her night watch, as the 2 of them explained to me. Madeleine has not seen them, however. But why did you ask about this?
So then I guessed correctly that visitors from the planet Trilon were on the center grounds. Can you tell me the names of the 2, including their meaning?
I can, of course. These 2 are an allied pair. The female person is called Sistana, which means the gush, and the male person is called Ipral, which means the laughing one. Ipral is spelled with a Y and pronounced U. That is the same for all names beginning with Y. But again, why did you ask for that?
Well, the thing is this. Last Wednesday, it was the evening of the 30th of June, Silvano drove the old Volvo to the garage car park to park. And since I had something to talk to Silvano about, I went there, seeing various marks on the bonnet of Atlante's car, so I asked Silvano what had happened. His answer was that he knew nothing, while I went to the car to take a closer look at the supposed scratch marks. When I got closer, I first saw that they were small finger and hand prints that were on the bonnet. Hands that had 6 fingers and a thumb, or 7 fingers. Of course, it was immediately clear to me that alien visitors must have been here. Some Trilons who had probably examined Atlante's car somewhat handily, because the handprints were etched into the first layer of paint, as were the papillary lines, as Silvano and I quickly discovered. The prints of the delicate hands were clear and distinct. So I was of the opinion that the whole thing must have happened just that day, around noon, because Silvano and I saw a silver disc-shaped object fly away at 11:17 TRRs. Of course, we then showed the handprints to all the members who came to the center, so also to Philia. This proved my view wrong, as she explained that she had already seen the prints sometime over the weekend and wondered what it was all about. Since her observation, however, it had rained several times in veritable torrents, but this did not harm the etched handprints because they remained unchanged. Of course, everyone asked me which extraterrestrials then could leave such prints, etc. So I explained that it could only be the small and about 110 to 120 centimeters tall and green-colored, as well as completely hairless and absolutely human Trilans, which I had been allowed to see 3 times so far, twice in your great spacer, and once here in the center, or at the front storage area. And of course they wanted to know how the chemical burn could have come about, which is why I explained that these small human beings have a light green skin that is covered with a thin film of acid, which has a slightly corrosive effect. And now, because the rascals were leaning on the bonnet, and also otherwise touching Atlante's car, The handprints and the papillary lines were etched into the paint. For my part, as you know, I cannot reach out to the little ones, or I will cauterize them. Nevertheless, you also know that I briefly touched the arm of one of these Trelans with my middle finger in your spacecraft, after which I felt a burning sensation like stinging nettles for about 18 hours, while my finger was reddened for almost 3 weeks.
Corrosive visit to the Simyase Silver Star Center, Hintish Madruti, or extraterrestrial humans of a special kind.
The variety of extraterrestrial life forms and extraterrestrial intelligence is described in detail in countless articles, books, small print, and the spiritual teaching of Phi Gu. About the possible appearance or the peculiarities of extraterrestrial humans, there are no limits to the imagination. Innumerable inhabited planets exist in space. Naturally, their inhabitants are adapted to the respective planets and bases of life. The living conditions, such as gravity or the atmosphere of a planet, are decisive factors for the anatomical appearance and shape of its inhabitants. In the course of the years, very extraordinary extraterrestrial humans have repeatedly appeared at the center in Hinterschmidruti, which is confirmed by reports from witnesses. A special example was an extraterrestrial woman named Asina from the Deneb system. Her origin is a very swampy and watery world, and she has the appearance of a lizard, being by earthly standards. In 1977, she had landed on our planet with her damaged ship. After contacting Billy in the center, she managed to return to her homeworld with Pleiaren help. It is known that the Pleiaren Federation includes human beings of the most diverse anatomical forms. They differ in size, color, and appearance. Some members of the Federation can only move around in the Pleiaren large ships with special breathing apparatus. The Pleiaren and similar terrestrial oxygen atmosphere is poisonous for them. Others have no trouble breathing our air. Thus, not the so-called Trelans or acid humans, as they are called by Billy, who recently visited the center. During the 6-week absence of Florina and Injana, 2 Trelan humans have taken over as substitutes for the various monitoring tasks on our planet. For this reason, in the early morning hours of the 26th of June 2004, a Trelanian alliance couple was present at the center in Hinterschmidruti. The 2 of them had left their ship in order to take a little walk on the center grounds. The 2 little persons were a female life form called Sistana and her ally called Ipral. The Trilaners are about 110 to 120 centimeters tall, light green in color, and completely hairless. A very special characteristic of these humans, however, is that their green skin is covered with a thin film of acid that is slightly corrosive. This peculiarity means that they should not be touched by humans of a different species, as this can lead to painful burns. In the course of the past years, Billy Edward Albert Meyer had the opportunity to meet these humans 3 times. One of these meetings took place in the Ptaah metropolitan area. In order to test the effect of a contamination with their skin and its secretion, Billy touched one of these humans with his middle finger. The incipient chemical burn left him feeling a burning sensation like nettles for about 18 hours, while his finger was still reddened for about 3 weeks. The Trilanian couple Sistana and Ipral have left their mark on the center. During their walk in the early morning hours, they also crossed the upper parking lot next to the tool garage, where the Phi Gu group vehicle and Atlant Bieri's car are parked. They must have found a very special pleasure in Atlant's vehicle. So one of them put his right arm and both hands on the bonnet of the vehicle and left an etched imprint of the arm and hands in the silver paint of the vehicle. Very clearly visible are the 7 fingers of the right hand, 6 fingers and the thumb, as well as the ball of the hand and the forearm. Even the filigree papillary lines of the palm of the hand have been etched into the paint in a clearly visible manner. Further fingerprints can be seen around the vehicle. The etching is so strong that even wind and weather were unable to harm it. Although it rained in torrents for quite some time after the incident, the prints were not discovered until around 5 days after they were made on the 29th of June. And although it rained heavily several times later, and thus in the course of the following weeks, and even sleet and fine hail fell, these were still clearly visible even on the 20th of July. All the core group members can testify to the event, as well as several persons unknown to FIGU and various passive group members from Germany, Austria, Italy, Switzerland, and New Zealand. See 362nd Contact Report, Friday, 2nd July 2004. Hans-Georg Lanzendorfer, Switzerland.
I remember that. You should have just stopped touching.
But I could not, because one has to experience everything oneself to form an opinion. For my part, I am a man of action and not of conjecture or hearsay. It is my nature that I always see things clearly, and, if possible, I have to experience and see for myself. Only in this way can one explain and have a say in something as precisely as possible.
That is what I know about you, and your last explanation is also true.
Of course, because otherwise the word comes up. From hearsay one learns to lie.
That, too, is very often true.
On the 10th or 12th of July, another international AIDS conference is scheduled to be held in Bangkok, Thailand. Since its outbreak, the epidemic has spread enormously all over the world, especially in the third world countries. It must have been in April 1990 when you told me that, from about 2003 or 2004, the epidemic would begin to spread to such an extent that it could degenerate into a catastrophe. It is said that about 38 million humans, including many children, are currently AIDS positive, although last year or the year before last you said that the number of those infected had already exceeded 40 million.
That is what I said at the time. That is correct. Today there are many more humans infected by the disease. The rule is that in about a third more AIDS-positive humans than the official figures say, because many infected ones are not registered and remain unrecognized. However, what corresponds to our more precise investigations is that there are currently just over 331,000 AIDS-infected people on Earth.
You said in 1990, as I mentioned earlier, that the AIDS epidemic would continue to spread. Can nothing be done about it? What is the estimated annual increase in the number of people infected with AIDS? It is said that there are currently 5 million.
A number that does not correspond to the truth. The current annual accumulation in AIDS infections is, according to our precise investigations, little more than 660,000, with the number increasing by a few cases practically every day. In order to do something against the epidemic, it requires the rationality and the sense of responsibility of the humans. But unfortunately, for years now, they have become criminally irresponsible, careless, wanton, and reckless in their caution against the AIDS epidemic. This is particularly true of the humans of those countries which live in the industrialized countries and have good education systems and authoritative information on AIDS and its prevention. This is in contrast to third world countries where the necessary education and all useful information is very scarce. And if humans assume that condoms would offer complete protection against AIDS, then this is a mistaken assumption, because these means are only of limited use, although various reasons can be given for this, such as the fact that condoms can manifest the tiniest damage through which the AIDS virus can be transmitted. However, bodily fluids such as sperm, vaginal secretions, and blood, which are deposited on the outside of the condoms and enter the genitals or through wounds directly into the blood, can also cause infections. Even intimate kissing is not without danger, because if there are even the smallest injuries in the mouth of an AIDS-infected person, which excrete blood and thus produce saliva, then an infection is also caused by this if there are also open wounds in the mouth area of the other partner. The same possibility also exists in the esophagus and stomach, if there are open wounds there, even the smallest ones, which then come into contact with swallowed AIDS-infected blood saliva. The truly only real and responsible possibility and protective measure to effectively prevent AIDS is that only hygienic and healthy sexual relationships between closely connected and demonstrably healthy partners are maintained. It is therefore essential that sexual practices are really only cultivated in close relationships, and only if there is a demonstrable harmlessness in terms of AIDS infection, for which a medical certificate should be provided under certain circumstances, for example in cases of infidelity between partners. Such proof of harmlessness must be based on the fact that it is provided 3 months after the last sexual contact and that no sexual acts of any kind take place in the meantime until the test. This is because, according to certain criteria, AIDS can only be detected in the blood 3 months after infection. If this necessary measure is followed, then AIDS can be effectively contained and brought to resolution. A complete sexual abstinence outside of this measure is of urgent necessity. If this is not followed, the epidemic will continue to spread unstoppably and ultimately lead to a real catastrophe. AIDS cannot be fought and resolved by having conferences led by wannabes with a lot of stupid speeches and screaming for more money. In order to fight AIDS, certain financial resources for education are necessary, but education is not the ultimate goal. It is only a part of what needs to be done. Of course, research also requires financial resources to find appropriate medicines that can make a cure possible, but again, this is only part of the whole that must be sought. Education and medicines are indeed the least part of what needs to be done, in my opinion, about 30 to 35%. The remaining 65 to 70% must be based on human behavior, because the biggest problem with the AIDS epidemic is the wild and uncontrolled sex life of the majority of the Earth humans. So the real reason for the spread of the epidemic is the aus our tongue, getting very badly out of control of the good human nature in terms of the unscrupulous and irresponsible practice of the sexual instinct. So the spread of the AIDS epidemic is also the responsibility of those who are unable to exercise sexual control over themselves and therefore enter into wild sexual partnerships indifferently, wantonly and recklessly, without carrying out the necessary controls and taking the necessary protective measures. However, it is wrong to assume that protective measures in the form of any means alone would suffice, because the control I have mentioned regarding possible infection is of utmost importance. It is also completely wrong to assume that AIDS is due to poverty and lack of money, because the real evil lies in the irresponsible wild sex life of the Earth humans, coupled with indifference, wantonness, and carelessness with regard to sexually transmitted diseases. In the third world countries, this has always been the case, which is why the largest overpopulation and AIDS-infected populations are prevalent there, whereas in the industrialized countries, this used to be different but changed rapidly and spread to the same extent as in the third world countries. And since then, when Beate Uhse, 1919 to 2001, greedy for profit and shameless in the matter of sex, laid the foundation for the destruction of sexual ethics with her machinations. The culturally shameful and shameless sex Ausartung has spread to such an extent that open prostitution, approved by the authorities and taxed, has been able to spread. The Ausartung of sex spread to all forms of pornography, sodomy, child prostitution, pedophilia, sexual rape of women, and sexual abuse of children by parents and relatives. In these matters, those who are wrong are often still praised and protected, although they should be punished, excluded from society and banished to places where measures are taken. Actors and actresses of pornography and fornication are praised as actors and actresses and taxed by the state, making the state itself guilty of prostitution and fornication. All this, however, increasingly promotes the Ausartung of prostitution and the sexual depravity of the human beings in all those countries where what has been said is true. And with the increasing sexual depravity, through which more and more purely sexual partnerships arise, good relationships between the human beings are more and more destroyed, so that functioning marital communities are destroyed from the ground up after they have been formed, or even no longer come into existence. The whole of the wild and ausgearteten verb form of Ausartung sex life also means, however, that in this regard all reason is dwindling, because the vice of sexual Ausartung has such a strong effect on the world of thought, and from there on the drives of the humans, that all control is lost. This is accompanied by indifference, carelessness, lack of concern and wantonness with regard to sexually transmitted diseases, and in particular AIDS. So no more caution is exercised, and recklessly and irresponsibly an infection is taken on. A fact that is especially true in the industrialized countries. Not infrequently, hatred is also expressed by AIDS-infected ones in the form of deliberately malicious sexual contact in order to infect others, because they themselves have fallen to the epidemic. And the fact that children still emerge from sexual contacts with AIDS surpasses any irresponsibility, just as when children are infected consciously, unconsciously, or carelessly by AIDS-infected persons. The shameful work of Ptaah and of the prostitutes and pornographic prostitutes, as well as of their advocates and imitators, etc., is already bearing very bad fruit in many relationships and will multiply them boundlessly if the Earth human does not quickly think about and carry out a conversion and turning away from his or her evils.
We will probably have to wait a long time for that, because there are too many know-it-alls. Just like in politics and with sects and religions, whereby I mean, in particular, certain members of the authorities, so-called clergy, certain priests, monks, abbots, bishops and cardinals, sect bosses, sectarian creatures of the state, etc. When I think of the U.S. presidential warmonger George W. Bush, and the American sect chief and sectarian superstar preacher Joel Osteen and his Lakewood sect, the sect that calls itself the Lakewood Church, which is on the religious conservative right and represents Republican ideas, and is therefore doing everything in its power to keep G.W. Bush at the helm, then I feel sick to my stomach. If these lunatics succeed in keeping Bush at the U.S. helm, then the devil will continue to roll over the world with war, murder, manslaughter, hardship, misery, capital punishment, and all kinds of evil. And then it could really come crashing down all over the world. And when I consider that the sectarian Bush supporters hypocritically pray for love and peace, while they advocate the death penalty and cry out for war, murder and destruction, then I have to ask myself how deluded and insane, pathologically dumb and dim-witted these humans must be, that they do not see the truth and only cry out for hate and revenge. But a person who knows real love and real peace can feel neither hate nor revenge within himself or herself, because true love and true peace are not and never can be reconciled with it. Unfortunately, however, it is the case that religions and sectarian beings make humans blind to the truth. In their delusion of belief, they feel better about themselves than they really are, but that they are in truth worse than those who do not belong to any religious or sectarian faith, and who do not cry out for death. Punishment, revenge, and retribution is something the misled ones are unable to grasp. In truth, they are caught in the vicious circle of seeking revenge, punishment, and retribution outside all human dignity and humanity, according to the vengeful god of their religious or sectarian faith. Such religious or sectarian believers are worse in their hatred, revenge, and retaliation than any badly out-of-control predator, and their brains and wrong thinking and the resulting false feelings are no more than a rotten, stinking, and inedible fruit. This kind of believer's sick thought and perception rests solely in the erroneous phrase, "God, I thank you that I am better than the others." But that they, however, are the completely osgarteten, those who have gotten very badly out of control of their good human nature, is something they are unable to recognize in their low intelligence, self-importance, irresponsibleness, lack of dignity, irreverence, as well as in their megalomania, dishonor, and inhumanity, because their blindness of belief kills all rationality. Of course, I do not mean to say that all believers in religion may be judged in this context, because in all religions there are humans who take their faith very seriously and try to live it in dignity, reverence, and humanity. These are humans who reject all gay vault beyond all might and violence, with all available forceful means, physical, psychical, mental, and to use consciousness-based powers, abilities, and skills in order to carry out and practice tremendous deeds and actions. And consequently also hatred, revenge, and retaliation, and who support any punishment, if such a punishment is necessary, only in a human-worthy, just, gewaltless, life-protecting, and humane manner. For my part, I know enough such humans for whom I can and must therefore also speak out in a positive wise, because what is right must also remain right. For many humans, the good teachings that exist, along with all the nonsense, in religions are a comfort and help for life, for some difficult situations and events, as well as for bearing dignity and living out reverence for one's fellow human beings and all life. Even if, in addition to the afterlife of good teachings, they have unfortunately also fallen prey to false doctrines concerning faith in God, and to religious rituals and dogmas, etc. Their life and attitude to life in terms of humanity, dignity, and reverence for all existence must be appreciated. Thus, it should also be said that in all religions there are believers who live the true teaching of that which is given by the spiritual teaching, and yet, as a result of their ignorance, they indulge in erroneous dogmas, ritual acts, and godliness. But they can be excused by the fact that they lack the necessary knowledge of the effective creational truth, because they have been and continue to be irresponsibly misled by religionists in this regard. Thus, they remain prisoners of false religious teachings, for through the divine and religionist threat of punishment in the case of apostasy, they live in fear and terror of divine punishment.
I do not think I need to comment on that, because I also cannot express the truth more appropriately.
Fine. Then a question. Quetzal, and you too, you have spoken several times during the last 25 years about the fact that the Earth human contributes a lot to accelerate the naturally imminent climate change. Your calculations have always stated that about 50% of this is of natural origin, and the other 50% is human-made. But now our scientists claim that only about 20% of the blame for the whole thing lies with humanity. And this is still the case today, as climate change is becoming more and more noticeable. The more the Earth human being destroys his or her entire habitat and does everything possible to produce more and more CO2, which mainly promotes the greenhouse effect and is therefore responsible for climate change, which is produced in addition to about 50 other gases, such as the methane CH4, the nitrous oxide, N2O, the tropospheric ozone, and last but not least, the artificial CFCs, the chlorofluorocarbons. And if I learned correctly, then carbon monoxide CO, nitrogen oxides NO and NO2, as some volatile organic compounds and sulfur-containing trace gases have a direct influence on the balance of radiation.
That is correctly explained.
That was easy, because Quetzal and you have explained it to me. And look here, I wrote it down so I could read it. But now my real question is, has anything serious changed with regard to the 50% that our scientists speak of only 20% human origin with regard to all the climatic changes?
No, nothing has changed in our calculations because the earthly scientists are very wrong in their assumptions and claims. Their calculations are very inaccurate and trivialize the facts in an irresponsible wise, thus misleading people.
I thought so. Then the forces of nature will continue to rage in the future, if I am not mistaken. Because if such false prognoses are made and false assumptions are made, nothing will change for the better. Climate conferences are being held, and measures are being adopted but not ratified, along with the fact that certain states, such as the USA, of course, are pinching back and high-handedly segregating themselves. Thus, climate conferences are completely pointless, with idiotically large financial resources being squandered on the participants who live high on the hog. But to the greenhouse effect, many humans cannot imagine anything about the planet. Because as crazy and irrational as it may sound, some think, when talking about the greenhouse effect, that only the increase of temperature in the greenhouses is meant. Unfortunately, there are many humans on our good Mother Earth who have a poor education, who have no idea what is being talked about with regard to the planetary greenhouse effect. I have already noticed this on various occasions when I was on a shopping trip and got into conversation with people.
This is really an educational gap, but as I know, many humans are only concerned with unimportant and trivial things, but they raise themselves to be important. This is how I want to explain your question. Basically, the greenhouse effect is a phenomenon of temperature increase occurring in greenhouses, which can be caused either naturally by the sun or by artificial means. During the normal natural process, normal glass allows the sun's high-energy UV radiation to pass through, but this does not apply to infrared radiation or heat radiation. Inside the greenhouse, the UV radiation or ultraviolet radiation is converted into thermal energy and thus increases the temperature in the greenhouse, as you know.
I know, yeah. There is also the term greenhouse effect.
That is also correct. Concerning the planetary greenhouse effect, the following is to be said. Carbon dioxide molecules, as well as methane and other trace gases, as you correctly mentioned, cause the temperature increase in the planet's atmosphere to be comparable to a greenhouse. These gases hinder the irradiated solar energy from being reflected back into space.
It should also be said that some greenhouse effect is necessary on our planet, but not on such a large scale that it will cause a climate change in the form of a climate upheaval. This greenhouse effect, which is a purely natural form, is a prerequisite for life to be able to develop on the Earth at all and to be preserved. But too much of the greenhouse effect is life-destroying, both for the fauna and the flora. Many genera and species may be transformed and mutated by a destructive greenhouse effect in order to adapt to the new conditions, as has happened several times during the last 500 or 600 million years. But other genera and species may become extinct, as was the case during these times. Please correct me if I am wrong. As far as I know, the average temperature on Earth would be about 18 to 20 degrees below zero if it were not for the natural greenhouse effect.
That is correct. Humans systematically destroy their habitat and have a very negative influence on the climate, forcing a change in climate. Severe storms are becoming more and more prevalent, and the whole of Europe is increasingly affected. Windstorm Zero, typhoons, hurricanes, landslides, fire disasters, avalanches, forest fires, floods, epidemics, hailstorms, large snowfalls, cold and heat waves, volcanic eruptions and earthquakes are occurring worldwide, including in Europe, as well as increasingly frequent and catastrophic explosions and other events caused by fuels, petroleum, gases, explosives, chemicals, and man-made accidents involving goods vehicles, means of passenger transport such as cars, buses, aircraft, railways, and ships. Yet those in positions of responsibility in the government and the scientific community are not fulfilling their responsibilities in the manner they should. Especially states like the USA, which you rightly mentioned, are completely irresponsible and autocratic, because they produce about 25% of the total planetary CO2 emissions, along with other harmful gases and substances. And when I specifically call out America another time here, the point is not to create hostility towards the USA, because like you, we are only showing what the USA policy with its Ausertungen is doing to its own people and the whole world. Just what the degenerations in relation to the death penalty and the worldwide Secret Service machinations and military operations around the world cause in the name of love, peace, and freedom. Driven by the faith and delusion of those who are called by God to be the savior of earthly humankind and to be the world police, far surpasses all self-importance, all arrogance, and all megalomania. With this, we are not generally attacking the American people in a purely verbal wise, but the Ausgarditan domestic and foreign policy as well as the Secret Service, military and criminal law systems of the USA. Our verbal attacks are therefore not, and in no wise directed against the righteous and honest Americans who are devoted to humanity, but solely against all American inhuman and degrading systems, and against all those who advocate, represent, and implement these systems. And if the USA does not withdraw from the world soon, and only take care of the interests of its own country, then the evils on the earth will become greater and greater and will fall out of control, which may ultimately lead to a third world fire in the form of a worldwide war. Iraq is a particular focal point because the American and British occupying forces, with all their multinational allies in that country, are breeding hatred and revenge, as well as malicious terrorism on an enormous scale, which will spread more and more all over the world. An averting of this and ultimately an end to all these evils can only be brought about if the USA and all its allies withdraw from Iraq and from the world into their own countries and give up the belief and delusion that they have to be the saviors of the world and world police. And when these facts are mentioned, then neither you nor we can be accused of hostility towards America, because neither you nor we know of any hostility that we had or would have against any people and nations. Anyone who claims otherwise is guilty of slander and defamation and of lying. But let us return to the general evil world events that will cause a lot of disaster and destruction and claim many lives in the times to come. If the above-mentioned relations are not quickly reversed, along with all the crimes against the planet, nature, and all life forms, then a catastrophe is inevitable. Very worrying. Together with the natural greenhouse effect, is the additional anthropogenic greenhouse effect due to trace gases, which are constantly increasing and are due to the irresponsible actions of humans. As you have correctly explained, there are about 50 trace gases involved in the planetary greenhouse effect, with carbon dioxide or CO2 being the most important factor. According to our measurements and records, the level in 1805 was still a low 278 ppm or particles per million, but it has risen by around 100 ppm to the present day. This means that the level is much higher than it has ever been during the last 150,000 years. And if we look at the whole thing in terms of its cause, the result shows that the increasing emission of trace gases, and especially CO2, is caused by the human beings of the Earth, especially energy sources of fossil origin, which are burned by explosion engines of automobiles, ships, motorcycles, and airplanes, etc., as well as with heaters, etc., mainly contribute to the anthropogenic greenhouse effect through their exhaust gases. The main cause of this is the irresponsible growth of the world's population, which is the factor that causes more and more industrial, heating, explosion, and jet engine exhaust fumes, etc., to be produced and pollute the planet's atmosphere. The deforestation of the rainforest is also of particular importance, as is the discharge of many fresh waters into the oceans, which causes climatic damage overall and also results in more and more enormous storms. The warming of the Earth's atmosphere has already started a greenhouse effect, through which the planetary surface temperature has already increased by 0.8 to 1.00 degrees, as our exact measurements show. In addition to this, sea levels have risen by up to 16 centimeters over the last 100 years, both due to the melting of large parts of the ice masses of the South and North Poles and the melting of mountain glaciers on the mainland. This also causes a lot of fresh water to enter the oceans, which drastically changes the sea salt content and also affects ocean currents, changing them and also contributing to climate change. Overall, the frequency of tempests and storms is also increasing, with the speed of the winds also increasing and becoming more powerful.
So the number of natural disasters is increasing and becoming more diverse. The Earth human, as a know-it-all, irresponsible, and self-important one, thinks he or she is omnipotent and will not become more sane. And even then, when he or she goes down in misery and destruction, then they still do not recognize that they themselves are to blame for the downfall, because even then they still seek to put the blame elsewhere, probably just with nature, which has been fighting against human madness for quite some time and is fighting back.
That too is a true word.
Here I have another question regarding same-sex unions. For some time now, people in various countries around the world have been getting smarter and allowing officially certified same-sex partnerships. Unfortunately, however, it is so that despite everything against it, still much resistance exists, and such connections are called lesbian marriages and homosexual marriages, or gay marriages. I find this humiliating, honor-sapping, and dignity-defeating for the people concerned. When I think about it, then a decent term like same-sex partnership would be useful and worthy of the matter. What is your opinion?
We use the same name along with the term same-sex alliance.
The terms lesbian unions, gay unions, and homosexual unions are also common, which I find equally inhumane.
All of these terms affect the honor and dignity of lesbian women and homosexual men. The terms same-sex partnership or same-sex alliance should have sole validity. However, other terms that protect honor and dignity can of course also be used.
I am sure such terms can be found if one searches for them. But tell me something. In a month's time, August 1st, will be the national holiday of Switzerland, celebrated with bang and smoke, as you know. On that day, politicians will be making public speeches that are good in some parts and bad in others, with those who make bad speeches, and those who flirt with the EU believing themselves to be particularly big and clever. In recent years, it has also become apparent that neo-Nazis and other right-wing extremists interfere with the national holiday, shouting and yelling hate slogans, instigating fights and causing all kinds of mischief. Ketzel already predicted such Ausartungen in the 80s, which is why I assume that August 1st in Switzerland will also see such Ausartungen in the future. And I would also like to say that all those who are shouting and screaming for the EU and pulling out all the stops to force accession through the Swiss people are basically no better than the neo-Nazis and other right-wing extremists. But the difference between those shouting for the EU and the neo-Nazis and right-wing extremists is that the latter, at least so far, distance themselves from EU accession.
Neo-Nazism and general right-wing extremism will continue to spread, also in Switzerland, and thus also leave their mark on the national holiday.
Can you tell me some important things that will happen in the next 60 days from today or in the 2 months ahead? By that I mean some predictions that are related to the next 60 days, and thus until the end of August.
Actually, we wanted to refrain from such predictions, because they do not bear fruit in the case of the Earth human.
That is true, but if it also does not bear fruit, then it does not do any harm.
That is a true and logical word. So let me briefly mention a few important things that I know from our look into the future which we still have made in your interest. From today until the month of August, various events and catastrophes are taking place all over the world, as I have already explained in general terms after we discussed the subject of climate change. In the month of August, the following important things happen chronologically. In response to the rainy and cold summer, the month of August shows itself to be beautiful, warm, and friendly from the very first days. Already on the first day of the month in the state of Paraguay, the death of about 500 humans will be reported as a result of a malicious fire disaster in a large department store. The large number of deaths is due to the fact that the department store managers have all exits closed due to alleged fear of theft by customers. As usual, however, it will be the case that in the end everything will be trivialized and everything will be presented differently than it corresponds to reality and truth. In this respect, insurance fraud and state interests and bribes play a very special role. Also in Paraguay, there is a lot of corruption, as it is common practice in many other countries. So already the first day of August will bring a lot of suffering and sadness. In Iraq, the terrorist attacks are also continuing inexorably in the first days of August and are causing many deaths during the month. Because in fact, in Iraq, as in Afghanistan, peace will only be slowly restored when the American forces and their allies withdraw, as we have said on several occasions. However, the people of the world do not want to listen to this, because on the one hand, they are unconditionally in bondage to their masters, and on the other hand, they are so irresponsible, self-centered, and selfish that they are only concerned about the safety of their own skin. So the taking of hostages and the killing of hostages will also continue from the beginning of August, as will the fighting in Israel and Palestine, with many more deaths to come. Already in the first 3 days of next month, the destruction of the oil pipelines in Iraq through acts of terror will continue and unleash large oil fires. On 3rd August, there will be a speech in the USA that a probe will be on its way to Mercury, a planet close to the Sun, for an approach time of about 7 years. On the same day, America will again allow public access to the Statue of Liberty, at least in the buildings of the statue, which were closed to the public after the terrorist attack of the 11th of September 2001. As of the 4th of August, there is the imminent danger that terrorists will attack and destroy the merchant fleet, oil container ships, and container ships with goods worldwide. In the night of August 4th to 5th, in France, in Les Charentes, in the Chambéry area of Savoy, in a riding school, there will be a new fire catastrophe and the death of about 10 humans, several children and adults. On the 5th of August in Germany, in a swimming pool in Oststadt in Essen, a chlorine gas accident occurs in which about 40 people are injured. On the same day, in a suburb of Budapest, a large explosion of explosives occurs in a fireworks factory, which, although causing few deaths, leads to a large fire and the destruction of many vehicles, destroying a large number of residential buildings. On the 5th and 6th of August and in the following period, particularly heavy fighting will take place in Iraq between the occupying forces and insurgents, with more than 300 deaths in the first 2 days alone, in addition to the fact that extremists will make public not only a Turkish hostage who will be shot, but also the report of an alleged decapitation of an American, which turns out to be a bad American student's joke. But the fighting, the hostage-taking, and the killing of the hostages will continue unabated in the future. The 6th of August will also be the day when it will become generally apparent that the terrorist organization, Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, etc., is reactivating old terrorist training camps, as well as that Israel is reopening the border with Egypt at Rafah. During the days from the 3rd to the 6th of August, leading members of the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda are also arrested in various countries, with planned terrorist attacks also becoming known. However, it is also likely that the largest dinosaur tracks in the world to date will be found in Switzerland, namely in the Jura Mountains, with diameters of up to 1 meter and more. On the 7th of August, as you probably know, the street parade will take place in Zurich, and around 973,804 humans from all over the world will be attending, as our very precise future-oriented counts have shown. This high number will be due to the fact that in Germany and Berlin there will be no street parade, at least this year, which to our knowledge is due to a lack of financial means. At the same time, a fight against the new spelling reform, caused by large publishing houses, is breaking out in Germany, which will lead to hot disputes. Furthermore, it is revealed that in Baghdad, the information workspace for the television station Al Jazeera will be closed by the transitional government, at least for a certain period of time, due to the fear that the Al Jazeera television will broadcasts of calls for violence, etc. The transitional government is also implementing a decision taken months ago to restore the death penalty for drug trafficking, murder, terrorism, and other violent crimes. Contrary to other assertions, the death penalty was first decided upon in order to execute Saddam Hussein. But the lie that this fact is not true is maintained. Furthermore, with regard to the weeks of flooding in South Asia, there will be a high number of deaths, running into several thousands. Also in Europe and in the whole rest of the world, windstorms will cause a lot of damage by storm, water, heat, and hail, whereby also the dead will have to be lamented and everything will become more and more overpowering. Also, the indebtedness of the states, the economy, and the private individuals is becoming more and more prevalent, whereby the total amount of debt will no longer be calculated with only billions, but with trillions of euros, pounds, francs, and dollars. Not only America has long since exceeded the trillion mark in dollars and Germany in euros, but England is also part of it, because this country has also already exceeded the sum of 1 trillion pounds in total debt. But this will not become apparent until the middle of August at the earliest. This will be around the same time when the world's most famous fireman, Paul "Red" Adair, dies in the USA at the age of 89. This is the man who became world famous in the 1950s for fighting and extinguishing gas fires, oil well fires, etc. Later, he also became more famous because, after the first Bush-Gulf War, he was the leading figure in terms of extinguishing the oil well fires in Kuwait, started by the Iraqi military. His death takes place in that period, when a large connecting bridge to the Peloponnesos, that is to say, the southern peninsula, is opened in Greece in the Gulf of Corinth. You know your way around there, because you lived in Corinthos for some time and got married there. And
Just a minute, please. What you say is, of course, correct, but there are events connected with it, not only in relation to me personally, but also historically, which might be interesting for everyone who reads our contact interview later. What is your opinion?
that should be so, yes. So if you want to tell?
Although I thought you could do better, because you probably know a lot more than I do. But if you like, when I met my future wife in Thessaloniki in Greece in 1964, on Friday the 25th of December 1964, it was through a woman named Vula, who came from Corinthos, where her parents still lived. On Monday, the 25th of January 1965, my bride and I celebrated a simple engagement, and I gained some unpleasant insights into the life of her family, which caused all of us unpleasantness, so that we had to separate again. Secretly, my bride was only 17 years old at the time. We obtained all the papers, 22 of which were different, in order to be able to marry, for which we first had the written permission of the parents, who then wanted to withdraw it by depositing our marriage papers at the authorities in Thessaloniki. During the time I lived in Thessaloniki, I earned my living by repairing electronic equipment such as music boxes and coffee houses, as well as radios and metal detectors, etc., in addition to selling shirts. Within a short time, living with the family became unbearable, and the father of my bride, Georgios, wanted to stab me and her with a knife, for the purpose of which he came to Thessaloniki from Katharini's pulmonary sanatorium, where he had been admitted due to illness. And since the conditions were getting worse practically by the hour, I kidnapped my bride on Thursday, the 25th of February 1965, and disappeared with her to Corinthos, where we found shelter with Vura's parents, who had also moved back to Corinthos because her German husband had been arrested in Thessaloniki as a result of serious fraud and later sentenced to 3 years in prison. However, neither Vula nor my bride and I knew that her husband was a swindler, which is why we naturally fell out of all clouds when the arrest occurred. Of course, the mother, Efrosini, and the father, Georgios, filed a complaint against me, which is why I was internationally advertised and wanted for kidnapping and theft of human beings and girls, precisely because I had stolen and kidnapped my underage bride. Of course, then in Corinthos the astonomia. That is to say, the police could not hide our presence with Vula's family, which is why they appeared at our house on Saturday 20th of March 1965 and took us in a jeep to the police station. At the police station, I was then confronted by the head of the police with the report of the human theft, whereupon I naturally told the whole story of the family terror. Thereupon, the chief of police telephoned for more than an hour with the police of Thessaloniki, who obviously knew the family circumstances of my bride and thus confirmed everything. When the telephone call ended, the man grinned and declared that we were free and that we should see to it that we would get the marriage papers. Until then, he arranged everything with the pastor of his church so that we could get married as soon as we had the papers. He made it clear to us that we should go to Thessaloniki as soon as possible and collect the papers from the authorities under the excuse that they were needed by the parents. He himself, he said, would telephone the person in charge of the authority next Monday to arrange everything. He also explained that we would have to copy the papers and then return the copies to the authority, but bring the originals to him, the chief of police, in Corinthos. 2 days later, on Monday, the 22nd of March, my bride and I made a hitchhiking trip to Thessaloniki, where we arrived in the morning of the 23rd of March and actually received the papers at the authorities. As advised by the chief of police, we immediately made copies, brought them back to the authority, and disappeared with the originals to Corinthos and brought them to the police. That was on Wednesday, March 24th, 1965, and then everything happened very quickly. The police chief sent us home while he went off to settle everything with the priest and the authorities. Only 3 hours later he came to us and reported that everything had been well arranged, so that we could marry the next day, Thursday, the 25th of March, 1965. When that was done, He had us officially picked up by his forces, as he said amusedly. It was probably at 10:00 when the wedding ceremony took place in front of the altar, because it was not otherwise possible in Corinthos at that time, after which we went to the authorities immediately afterwards with the chief of police, who was present at the wedding in civilian clothes, in order to settle the official matters. Afterwards, he brought us home and explained that he would now send his armed warriors pro forma to officially arrest us and me as girl kidnappers. At the same time, I should take the marriage certificate with me. Okay. 20 minutes later, a police jeep pulled up, from which 4 people armed with machine guns got out. Since we were already waiting for them in front of the house, things happened quickly. We got into the jeep and drove to the police station, where the boss welcomed us with a grin and ordered us in. Then he officially announced to me under several witnesses that I was arrested for girl abduction, etc. as discussed. I then handed him the marriage certificate and explained to him that the girl I had kidnapped was my now wedded wife, because I only kidnapped her to marry her and to free her from the clutches of her vicious mother, who was the main ringleader in the family terror. Well, well, said the police chief, flanked by some law enforcement officials who diligently applauded his words. That is a different matter. And we are not aware of anything that the kidnapping of one's own wife is a criminal offense. There must be some mistake. So please go about your business, and congratulations. Those were roughly his words, which were confirmed by the attending legal representatives, and we were able to go our way with many congratulations. But now to Corinthos and the Peloponnese, about which the following must be said. Corinthos is the capital of the administrative district and is situated in the northeast of the Peloponnese. The city has about 30,000 inhabitants and is located at the Gulf of Corinth. It is an inlet of about 130 kilometers long, and this separates central Greece from the Peloponnese. Corinth has an artificial canal, the Canal of Corinth, which is about 6.35 kilometers long and about 24.5 meters wide, and was built between 1881 and 1893. The city was founded by the Dorians in the 10th century BC and was the most important and richest trading city in southern Greece after Athens in ancient times. Corinthos also has a rich history in relation to the Corinthian War, and in relation to the rule of the Romans and Macedonians, as well as the Byzantines, the Turks, Crusaders, and Venetians, etc. The Corinthian War lasted 9 years, from 395 to 386 BC, I think, and was fought against Sparta, together with Athens, Argos, and Thebes. When the Macedonians were driven out, Corinthos belonged to the Achaean Confederation from about 243 BC, after which the Romans destroyed the city in 146 BC. Only in the year 44 BC, the Romans repopulated the city as a so-called Roman citizens' colony. This in addition to the fact that the city also became known through the so-called Corinthian letters in the New Testament. The area of Corinthos is strongly earthquake endangered. Therefore the city was destroyed in 1858, after which Nea Corinthos, that is to say New Corinthos, was rebuilt 6 kilometers away northeast of the destroyed city. If I remember correctly, Corinthos has only belonged to Greece since 1830 or so, before the Turks left, who had been the occupying forces since about 1458. And in relation to the Peloponnese, it has to be said that it is only connected to central Greece by the canal or isthmus of Corinth. As I have already mentioned, the canal was cut from 1881 to 1893. The peninsula has about 700,000 inhabitants, and the administrative district is Tripoli. I do not know much about the history of the Peloponnese, but I do know that in ancient and archaic times there were important political and cultural centers, such as Olympia, Mycenae, and Sparta, etc. There was also the so-called Peloponnesian War between Sparta and Athens, which was in the period from 431 to 404 BC, if I remember correctly. This was about the domination of Greece. Apart from that, there are several other war stories, such as the Archidamian War, according to Archidamus II, king of Sparta, but I am not very familiar with these events. As far as I know, the name Peloponnese is based on Pelops, who according to Greek mythology was the son of Zeus, Tantalus, and a nymph. Tantalus was the favorite and confidant of the gods, but was thrown by them into the underworld where he must stand thirsty in water that always recedes when he wants to drink. Furthermore, branches of fruit hang above him, which also spring back whenever he wants to eat from them. According to the Greek myth, Tantalus had to suffer this punishment because he slaughtered his son Pelops and presented him to the gods as food, thus testing their omniscience. The one killed by his own father was then resurrected by the gods. He then deceived Hippodameia into his wife, the daughter of King Oikonomaios. Hippodameia then bore Pelops 2 children, Atreus and Thyestes, while he became a powerful king in southern Greece. This is what I remember from what I have learned about Greek mythology, about the history of Corinthos and about the Peloponnese. Whether the dates are correct, as I have called them, and whether the connections are correct, that
Everything matches my knowledge. Be confident, your memory is good. But now let me continue with the predictions as you wished until the end of August.
if you have enough time, there is something I would like to ask you first that seems important to me.
You can put your question forward because I am not in much of a hurry today.
My question is this. For some time now, there has been talk about whether NATO should lead operations outside of Europe. Do you know whether NATO will really interfere in foreign affairs outside of Europe?
This will indeed be the case, because the NATO decisions are that a so-called NATO Eurocorps will be deployed to Afghanistan in the first half of next August, with multinational military forces under French command.
Absolutely sure.
It is a foresight, so there is no doubt about it. Unfortunately, the whole of Europe, or at least those countries that provide military forces in this operation, will not be spared by terrorism. In the foreseeable future, there will be just as unpleasant things to come out of the Al-Qaeda terrorist organization in this respect as there will be in those countries providing military forces in Iraq to support the Americans and the British. Japan will have to mourn deaths and injuries because, according to our forecasts, a nuclear reactor accident is taking place there in Mihami as a result of damage to the cooling water system. In the month of August, the risk of forest fires will increase throughout Europe as a result of extreme heat and drought, while there will be a threat of severe storms throughout the world and a tendency for more crashes of all kinds of aircraft, both as a result of terrorist acts and mechanical and electronic damage to aircraft, which will of course claim a number of lives. The Swiss airline Swiss will be lucky in the misfortune, because during a flight of an aircraft from Amsterdam to Zurich, there will be multiple damage to the drive units. This will necessitate an emergency landing, which fortunately succeeds at Frankfurt Airport in Germany, leaving all crew members and passengers unharmed. Also concerning Switzerland, it turns out that the financial institutions deny their customers advance credit on credit cards, which means that accounts can no longer be overdrawn. Credit card liability is limited to the effective account amount. Before the 10th of August, Iran's leaders will presume to see themselves as a nuclear power. And in order to be able to produce nuclear weapons, they will have the audacity to send a wish list to France, England, and Germany to obtain all the necessary nuclear equipment from these countries. The former Iraqi favorite of the Americans, Ahmed Chalabi, who is indeed a fraud and an otherwise serious criminal, but who was nevertheless intended by the Americans for the new Iraqi government, will be prosecuted by the Iraqi judicial authorities. The same applies to his nephew Salem Chalabi, who will be held responsible for murder. In Germany, poverty is becoming more and more widespread, which will become blatantly true next month, as the high level of unemployment means that welfare cases are increasing more and more, which will also be accompanied by a rise in crime. But in Germany, it is not only adults who are becoming social cases, but increasingly children and young people, many of whom are also neglected. A fact that is also transferable to Switzerland and various other countries. Unfortunately, in all European countries, sexual child abuse continues unchecked, not only by one's own parents, but also by friends and acquaintances and by foreign sex offenders. Not infrequently, children of both sexes are not only sexually abused, but also tortured and murdered, which also happens in connection with child pornography. Public prostitution also continues to increase, taking on increasingly obscene and inhumane forms, all of which is still protected by the authorities, since they profit financially from it through taxes and other levies. Already in the so-called sex trade, everything has become very much ausgarteter, gotten more so very badly out of control of the good human nature than it was in the former cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Also, the warlike and terrorist Ausartungen around the world have reached dimensions in their forms as they have never happened before on the earth. And unfortunately, these are not the last forms of Ausartungen, for many Earth humans are becoming brutalizing and degenerating, with the murderous, warlike, sectarian, and terrorist machinations of certain irresponsible state powers providing the foundation for this. Since the European conquest of the United States of America, a great deal of evil has been brought from there, the U.S., to the whole world, much more than has been brought from any other country. There are no parallels anywhere in the world to all the misfortune emanating from U.S. America. It is.
Excuse me for interrupting, but I would also like to say that all these disgraceful ones do not give a damn about the creational laws, about life, about the well-being of human beings and their future, nor about love, true peace, true freedom and harmony. Thus, they also lack any sense of real joy and real happiness, for they chase only their might and their own profit. They do not care at all about the effective truth of creational love and all that is elevated from it, for in their selfishness, in their self-importance and in their megalomania, they know no responsibility whatsoever and walk over dead bodies, even when these are their own parents and brothers and sisters.
Unfortunately, this corresponds to the facts.
This whole thing is much worse than I said it was. So the righteous have a devilishly difficult time in this world, where they have great difficulty in finding the truth of all things and living by it. But continue with your predictions if you still have time.
I am really not in a hurry, and if that is also the case with you, then I will mention some more things that will happen in the month of August.
Okay, I will sleep a little faster when I go to bed.
I have to memorize this saying. Well, here is the thing. Unfortunately, a series of terrorist bomb attacks will be carried out in Turkey, starting with Istanbul, affecting hotels and a liquid gas factory. In Germany, in the Bavarian area of Grundremmingen, a short circuit will occur in a nuclear power plant, which will cause a great commotion, but without serious consequences. Also in Germany, this time in Berlin, another event will make a big noise because it will happen that a big fire will break out in a tunnel of a suburban train and spread fear and terror among the passengers. But people will be lucky because apart from great material damage, hardly any other people will suffer significant damage. During the same period, a serious accident will also occur in Austria, as a heavily occupied bus will leave the road in Hallein in Salzburg and crash down a steep slope, causing several deaths and injuries. Such events will become more frequent in many places, along with fires of all kinds. This will also be the time when storms are again to be feared in Europe, which will cause a lot of damage. In some places, there will also be a plague of exceptionally aggressive wasps, in addition to an invasion of beetles. Japan, too, will have reason to complain, because a huge landslide will cause very great material damage. On the other hand, it will be gratifying to see that international intervention is slowly taking place in Sudan with regard to the persecution and massacres of the black population by murderous Arab gangs. While it will remain doubtful whether the Sudanese government will take serious steps to stop the murderous militias, little will really be done. Yeah, what do you want to say?
Something will finally happen there, even if it will probably only be international intervention and help. At least a beginning. The terrible events in Sudan are shouting to the heavens. In the refugee village of Darfur, about 1 million refugees are languishing, with many children, women and men dying of exhaustion, disease, and malnutrition. It really is time for the so-called international community to take action and get the Sudanese government to do something about the murderous gangs of horsemen. Until now, these government scoundrels have tolerated and perhaps even supported the murderous gangs. While I am on the subject of gangs of killers, as you said, a number of leaders of the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda will be arrested in August. Does this have an effect on the fact that terrorism is somehow headless, which I cannot imagine, because everything is far too well organized, and therefore lost heads are immediately replaced?
Which is indeed the case. Al-Qaeda is a terrorist organization that is structured in such a manner that every lost member can be replaced immediately. If a member drops out, they can be replaced by 2 others. The organization has many expert organizers and trainers, as well as connections in all states and even in certain government departments and in the private and state economy, as well as in various small and large financial institutions, in which traitorous elements are up to no good in order to help the terrorist organization. The powers that be and other responsible persons of all states, as well as the mass of the population, have still not realized that the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda, along with all its subsidiary groups, has already become so powerful that it actually has a powerful army worldwide. And when this army strikes, then humankind and the world will be hit by so much disaster, affliction, misery, murder, and destruction as the most terrible nightmares cannot show.
I thought so. And that danger is surely growing. But now continue your remarks. It is getting late, but there is still a lot you can do. You were right to mention the danger, and the fact that it is getting late. Well, as you wish. Another hostage is decapitated in Iraq, an Egyptian who has his head brutally cut off with a knife. Go on. West Africa will be struck by a very large plague of locusts, and Florida in the USA by a crab invasion, while China in turn will be struck by the first of a series of worldwide earthquakes, which will occur throughout the year, even in a more severe form. Earthquakes can be triggered not only by planetary processes such as tectonic shifts, etc., but also by human-induced explosions, water dams, building and urban development, as well as by violent storms, snow and rainfall, volcanism, large hailstorms, earth mass shifts and floods, etc. Also the storms of all kinds, as they have been appearing again and again for many years, continue to increase. The Earth human has long since lost respect for the forces of nature and is working against nature and the entire planet. But in return, they have to accept a great deal of disaster, suffering, affliction, death, and horror, because nature and the planet have been striking back for decades. In Iraq, terror continues unabated, with the American occupying forces also causing much harm, and even losing respect for the dead when, like the Iraqi military, terrorists and other insurgents, they enter the cemetery in the holy city of Najaf, carry out their fighting from there, and occupy the city. In the neighboring country of Turkey, there will be deaths and injuries when a very serious train accident occurs on the line between Ankara and Istanbul in the province of Kocaeli, in which two trains collide at full speed and force. What we can complain about Israel is that under Ariel Sharon's thumb, the Israeli military with tanks, etc., is attacking the Khan Younis refugee camp through criminal military machinations, which of course will not remain without consequences from the Palestinian side. Shortly after the attack, a car bomb is detonated by Palestinian militants, and the assassin blows himself up, which is only a prelude to other similar enterprises. Of course, Israel then strikes back again, then again the Palestinians, and so on, whereby everything continues in the old style. Apart from the fact that Iran has the audacity to seek nuclear technology from various states in order to become a nuclear power, this state is also working on the further development of medium-range missiles, which will also be officially tested in the first half of August. In Spain, new attacks by ETA are threatening, with northern Spain and the cities in Catalonia being particularly at risk. In Germany, many humans will rise up against the government in demonstrations against inhuman decisions and machinations under the name Hartz IV. Correctly seen, the governmental machinations are effective state terror against the population, as will unfortunately also be the case in Switzerland, which, due to the irresponsibility of the government and those citizens who do everything to be able to join the EU, bows more and more to the dictatorial EU laws. In this respect, everything is getting worse and worse in a dictatorial wise, because the incapacity of those in power is more and more expressed in inhumane machinations, laws, regulations, prohibitions, and decrees to the general detriment of the population. The state mighty ones are leading the people more and more into slavery and exploitation at home, including in Switzerland, but also in relation to the European Union, which is truly nothing more than a covert dictatorship, but which is becoming more and more openly recognizable as such. Those responsible for the state are incapable of leading the states and of operating a financial economy, which results in freedom from debt. On the contrary, such mismanagement is being pursued that ultimately everything collapses. The EU has also made it possible for many criminals to enter and operate in EU countries, with newer and newer forms of crime appearing. For example, it has been found that criminal gangs from Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic have established themselves in the EU countries and have specialized in looting the offertory sticks of pilgrimage churches, cathedrals, shrines, and other churches, which brings criminals a great deal of profit during the holiday season, when tourism is booming and holidaymakers in the churches, cathedrals, and shrines, etc., offer up horrendous amounts of money. Criminals have, however, also been creeping into the Olympic organization for years now, with theft and fraud already a daily occurrence. For the first time, however, action will be taken against these criminals in the coming period, even before the Olympic Games begin in Athens on the 13th of August 2004. In sport of all kinds and in Olympic competitions, doping cases are also becoming more and more prevalent, because the more and more the participants in competitions are no longer concerned with real sporting achievements, but only with their megalomania as winners, their image and reputation, their glorification and the horrendous winners' prizes, as well as the winners' medals and the national and world championship titles, etc., that they can get hold of. The personal honor with regard to one's own honesty, with regard to a fair sports fight without stimulants and doping agents in order to achieve top performances and an honorable victory, has dropped to an absolute zero. In this form, competitive sport degenerates more and more into a farce. If we look away from sport to other things, cloning comes back into focus, which will once again be the talk of the town, because in August England will be the first European country to officially allow therapeutic cloning for stem cells. This will, of course, once again call into question all the false ethicists and all the other troublemakers who, in their horrendous stupidity and incomprehension, want to condemn and halt progress. Were it not for these lunatics who have always undermined progress, earthly humanity would already have achieved success in many important matters, and this would have caused much suffering, affliction, and misery to disappear. Particularly in the field of medicine, without the troublemakers and false moralists, etc., the state of affairs on Earth today would still seem utopian to terrestrial humankind. Shortly after the earthquake, China is hit by a severe typhoon, which will cause many deaths and injuries. But Florida in the USA will also be hit by very severe hurricanes, which will occur likewise as in China on 11th, 12th, and 13th of August. At the same time, in Spain, ETA's threat of assassination will be fulfilled in the first phase with 2 bomb attacks. In the USA, in the state of California, over 4,000 same-sex couples have been allied with each other in marital communities in recent months, but this has been in violation of the laws in force in the state. This violation of the law will be used by the Supreme Court as an opportunity to annul all same-sex unions, which will not only lead to much resentment among the female and male couples concerned, but also to great hatred against the jurisdiction and the authorities. This, in addition to the fact that this inhumane court decision will cause much suffering and grief among those affected, and suicides must therefore also be expected. In St. Pölten, in Austria, the seminary in which for several years lewd homosexual acts were committed among priests and candidates for priesthood, was closed down following a Vatican decision. In fact, these were not normal homosexual sexual relationships, but a form that must be called male prostitution. This, in addition to the fact that a person involved in it was also killed for reasons of wanting to break the silence surrounding this unworthy activity, although other factors also played an important role. And as is customary in the circles of the Catholic Church, these things are concealed and withheld from both the judiciary and the public, so it is highly questionable whether the wrongdoers involved will ever be called to account for the whole thing by the law. The Catholic Church has always known how to shirk secular laws and secular justice by all possible unfair means. It has always made its own laws, which of course have always been designed for its own benefit. In this way, this also applies to that fallible pedophile Catholic priesthood which sexually assaults children and which is thus protected from secular jurisdiction, in that the Vatican maintains silence and conceals everything and, if possible, uses hush money to make the abused persons concerned sneak away, as I would like to say about this. Also, fallible Catholic parish forces themselves act in the same wise with regard to hush money. Ausartungen such as pedophilia, and events such as have been taking place and happening for years in the seminary in St. Pölten, or the fact that various priests indulge in prostitution, have secret loves, are secret fathers of children, and make sexual use of other men's wives in order to satisfy their sexual urges, can only result from the celibacy or inability to marriage of Catholic priests, which is contrary to male nature. It is true that in priesthoods of other faiths, there are also misdeeds in the above-mentioned forms, but they are not as exuberant as in the priesthood of Catholicism. And these are incontrovertible facts which we have studied and clarified in detail, and which are irrefutable. In fact, the above-mentioned seminary in St. Pölten must be regarded as a male brothel seminary, as well as a pedophile site where pedophiles cavort. But now, dear friend, it has really become very late, so we should end our conversation for today. There are only a few things I would like to explain, after which we should consider other things in the future at a later date. That may be after our vacation, because for my part I will go to my daughter Simyase, and will not be back until the 12th of August for the next correction work with Bernadette and you. Florina and Injana are also going with me, so the 3 of us will be unreachable. Kitzal is also absent for a longer time. Should it be necessary for one of us to be present, then you can contact Taljda, because she should be reachable for you, because she is moving in the earthly space and has a certain task to fulfill. So I will now only briefly mention the following events, which are known to me through a look into the future. The one hurricane in Florida, USA will be one of the worst of the last decades, will cause a lot of dead and injured people, and will cause tremendous material damages, which will cost immense dollar sums. Basically, however, the inhabitants of the affected areas which are hit by hurricanes in America are irresponsibly responsible for the destruction caused by natural forces such as hurricanes. This is because, firstly, people have created and settled in residential areas that have been extremely endangered by uncontrollable hurricanes since time immemorial. And secondly, they construct their homes and other buildings using lightweight construction and such inferior materials that they cannot withstand hurricanes and tornadoes from the outset. In this respect, the same irresponsibility is being shown as by those people who build their dwellings, etc., on the shores of the seas, lakes and rivers, and then complain about nature when great waters come and flood everything. Carelessly and irresponsibly, the floodplains are built over and covered with concrete, so that the natural large waters can no longer give way and consequently cause great damage and cause death and injury. The same applies to those irresponsible people who build their structures on avalanche slopes or in volcanic areas and in earthquake zones that are particularly at risk. If all this were not the case, natural disasters on Earth would cause far less destruction, death, grief, distress, and misery. However, the man on Earth does not want to listen to reason, which is why he also has to bear the consequences of all the evils that he himself is ultimately responsible for. So further disaster in America will also be inevitable, because the devastating hurricane will not yet be finally removed from Florida, where a whole series of further hurricanes will form, which in turn may cause damage. However, before these storms break out, around the 13th of August, Spain will once again be affected by forest fires, with the Valencia area being the first to be affected. At about the same time, in Goldberg in Mecklenburg, Germany, a serious accident occurs during the renovation of a school building, which will cause several deaths when the dilapidated structure collapses to a large extent. Then there will be a massacre in Africa when Burundian Hutu rebels break into a UN refugee camp and massacre more than 200 human beings. As usual, however, everything is trivialized by the authorities and the number of those murdered is given as much less. Then, on the 14th of August in Iraq, in the holy city of Najaf, there will be an evil rainfall for the American occupants. Because in the days before, the Americans will try to negotiate with the Iraqi Shiite religious leader Muqtada al-Sadr, but this will fail because of al-Sadr and the insurgents in bondage to him. Their purpose will be to drive the U.S. occupiers out of the city, but this will not be accepted by the occupiers. Ultimately, the whole thing can escalate maliciously, and not only in the Shiite city of Najaf, because Muqtada al-Sadr has many followers in all Shiite areas who belong to him and are willing to fight, bleed, and die for him. It will be the same time when the Pope travels to Lourdes to take part in the Marian pilgrimage. He will also drink the allegedly miraculously healing Lourdes water in the subliminal hope that this will heal him from his physical and age-related decay. This, however, is wisely already officially denied by the Vatican through the Pope's order before he drinks from the water in Lourdes. This in anticipation of the fact that, in order to heal the infirmities, there must be a deep faith in the alleged apparition of Mary and its miraculous effects, whereby profoundly believing people bring about self-healing with regard to their ailments, pains, diseases, and infirmities. This faith, however, is what the Pope lacks, because all his religious fuss is only displayed by him as an unbeliever in order to shine and be adored before the believing Catholics. This because the man is unusually selfish, self-centered, egotistical, and addicted to power and domination, which he is able to hide under the guise of alleged philanthropy. This is as much a shamefulness without equal as the fact that he does not resign from his office and stubbornly clings to it because he does not want to give up his power, as is the case with all powerful people. But I will go on to report that in Assam, India, during the celebrations of Independence Day, a bomb attack will be carried out by extremists, killing around 20 people. Italy will also be threatened with attacks, which will be announced as a threat by an extremist group in the middle of August. On the 15th of August, the expiry of an ultimatum by a terrorist group will be announced, whose demand is that Italy withdraw its troops from Iraq, and since this will not happen by that date, new terrorist threats will be made against Italy and its leader Silvio Berlusconi. He is the driving force and, as a power-hungry and fanatic of the American war and terror, he bears the decisive responsibility for Italian military forces, etc., providing aid to the American occupiers in Iraq. Unfortunately, the threats in Italy are being taken lightly, which can have very serious consequences if certain threatening causes arise from which very malignant effects are produced. The same terrorist group that includes Italy in its terrorist attacks will also threaten all other U.S. occupying forces in Iraq with terrorist attacks, as well as all countries that actively support the American war and terror activities in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that these threats are very serious will also become apparent in mid-August when terrorists and other insurgents in Iraq attack the so-called Green Zone, the actual administrative center with mortars and bombs, etc., when the National Congress is held there, which is to decide on a transitional parliament and a new Iraq. But there will also be a trouble spot in Switzerland, in the city of Olten, where a mass brawl will take place between right-wing radicals and foreigners. The right-wing extremists will be xenophobic and xenophobic elements. At the same time, there will also be an event in Liechtenstein, which is politically assigned to Switzerland, because Prince Hans Adam of Liechtenstein will resign his office and transfer it to his son, hereditary Prince Alois of Liechtenstein. All these things will take place until the 15th of August of this year. I will be able to tell you about further events at a later date, but I think that I should really only mention extremely important things that no longer fall within the scope of what I have done with all that has been said. I will have to leave that to you, of course. For my part, I just thought that once again, some predictions might help to make the people of the Earth think about everything and maybe become better in some things.
Which is to be hoped for, but which will certainly not be, because it is probably true that very serious and great misfortune must first come upon all mankind before it begins to develop valuable, useful, progressive, evolutionary, and life-promoting thoughts and feelings in the right direction. Values from which true efforts and actions arise that lead to true love and harmony, as well as to a real, universal, and inclusive peace in effective freedom. But now, my friend, I want to say goodbye. Goodbye.
Thank you for all your comments, and then also take care and goodbye.